storytelling. Today you've got myself and Danielle again. And the purpose of today really is just to guide you through, as I said, our third installment in this box set, if you like. There's around, I think there's 6 or 7 in total, I think, Danielle, is there, that we're
yes,
taking people through to. And the end of each, just like today, there is a free template that you can download. The one today, because we're talking about creating content and user-generated content specifically, today is a free creative briefing template that you can use internally and for agencies that you work with. And it guides you through the process nicely of what Danielle's going to talk you through today. First things first, the usual housekeeping. So any questions as we're going through, feel free to add them into the chat and we'll come back to you as soon as we can. If not, all of our webinars are available on our website, revenuegrowthagency.co.uk. And if you navigate to the top under the resources section, there is a whole section on webinars in under that subfolder, and not just the webinars that we're covering in this box set, but actually also all of the other webinars we've been through over the last 2 years. There's lots of amazing content in there, all free. You don't need to give us your email address or your kidney or anything else. Just feel free to download and use as you see fit. The last webinar was a really interesting one and went down really quite well, and it was largely to do with how brands find and develop their brand story. And it came off the back of our experience of working in the luxury space, of brands that have got really impressive heritage, or they've got some fantastically unique products, they've got high demand products, but there seems to be a disconnect between what they're saying in their branding documents and then what they're putting out there to their customers in terms of their marketing activity, and or not developing the story at all. So the last session that we did, again available for download, was all about how do you find that story, and the free piece of downloadable content was a template where we guide you through it word for word, how to do it, how to find your brand story, how to develop it, and then how to get it out there into attracting new customers, which is really what we're all interested in. We touched on a little bit about the emotion side of it and how to use that brand story to connect with emotion and when to do that. So some brands are more aligned to the sort of comedy side of things. They like to play on having a little bit of fun. Some brands are much more serious. Some brands like to sort of pull on the sort of emotional heartstrings. All of those things are great. It's just about tying that into a brand story that means something and fits for you guys as individual brands. And then we went through a bit of how to collect information and customer data that can then help to inform that. So definitely worthwhile downloading that, having a look at that. The very first one in this series is a bit more of a generic view of why storytelling is so important to brands, and particularly when we're looking to grow, whether it's in the UK or in foreign shores, and particularly when we're looking to target new customers, and how do we capture their attention immediately when it's an increasingly busy space on Meta and Google search results pages, and even on digital out of home and television too. So moving forward then, I'm going to pass you across to Danielle, and this is a logical progression where we're now saying, okay, so we understand why our story is important and how to construct it and get it out there. But how do we do that in terms of the practicality of ads, and what do we say and how do we say it? So I'll pass that across to Danielle. I think you're going to talk first of all a bit about the misconception of some of the terms used.
Yes, thanks, Andy. So I think it's important when we're looking at creative strategy, content creation, and this term that we hear a lot of, social first creative. And I think especially our experience that we've seen in the luxury space is that when you mention social first, brands kind of immediately think about kind of what looks like homemade creative. So very low production value, kind of, scrappy and quick. And actually, I think that that's a misconception of the term social first. Social first is not about the style of creative per se or the production of the creative. Social first is about audience. And it's thinking about how does our audience behave on social, and that is the meaning of social first. So we're not looking at product first, we're not looking at brand first, we're looking at social first. How do our specific audiences behave on social platforms, and then catering our content to then appease those needs? Because there's a lot of talk at the moment about social search, about people's discovery habits on social. Social media is no longer just about kind of social communication. It's about entertainment and it's about discovery. So if you think about TikTok as a platform, people initially went to TikTok and still do to be entertained. It's an entertainment channel. You know, people aren't chatting to each other like they are on Snapchat or Messenger or WhatsApp. They're going there specifically to watch videos and to be entertained. So therefore, if you're pumping really product specific content onto TikTok, that in my opinion is not social first, because you're not catering your content to that particular platform. So when we're thinking about discovery, as it says there, we should be reaching audiences no matter their discovery preferences. So, you know, Gen Zs and Gen As are using TikTok to discover new products. They're using it as a search engine. So there needs to be content that's catered for that. As a millennial, I'm still very much pumping my searches into Google. And so is my mother. So there's a difference in behavior when it comes to demographics, but that doesn't mean that I'm not using TikTok, but I use it in a slightly different way to somebody who's 10 years younger than me. You know, they're searching for restaurants and hotels and, you know, experiences through social platforms, whereas I am still looking at TripAdvisor and, you know, Google reviews. So social is all about discovery, but it's about knowing the difference between behaviors of your audiences. I would say as luxury brands in general, you're looking at a slightly older demographic, unless you're, you know, a brand like Coach, who is trying to kind of lower your age demographic. So with that in mind, I would say social first assets, in inverted commas, could and should fall under these 4 categories, not exclusively, but this is kind of where you should be. So you've got your normal campaign video and imagery, which I would hope that you're already doing in terms of those big brand pieces. And that could be, you know, slightly higher production value. That could be, you know, you hiring models, you getting proper photographers in, videographers, you know, having that kind of big theme, that big creative theme. And then you've got on the back of that, supporting content for social, which is your behind the scenes, which is something that I've seen grow over the past 2 years in terms of really effective content. And that is, you know, going behind the scenes of the business, behind the scenes of the photo shoots. It could be, you know, we've done video shoots in factories of the products being made, because the brand story is about craftsmanship and heritage. Therefore, the way that the products are made is really important. So behind the scenes really lends itself to that story that you would have, you know, off the back of our previous episode, hopefully, if you've had time to watch that and think about it, you'll have an idea in your head about whether that aspect of your business is important to your customer. We're then looking at UGC, which would fall into that kind of middle of funnel social proofing style of creative. And I'll come on to UGC in a little bit more detail, because it has evolved, I would say, over the past couple of years. It's not just unboxing videos anymore. It encompasses a lot more nuance. And it's also something that you can create in-house now, which is something that brands weren't necessarily doing before. So we're going to touch on UGC a lot more. And then we've got our kind of standard product and bottom of funnel, which is going to be, you know, your e-commerce assets. So, you know, product shots, close up of product. But then you can also look at kind of reviews and your standard kind of static images and probably the style of creative that you're already doing. So
UGC seems to worry people the most, though, doesn't it, Danny? I know you're going to come on to it later on, but as soon as you mention UGC, most of the luxury brands that we work with sort of go in the shells and go, oh no, it's not for us.
Yeah, I think it's very complex, because UGC is massive on something like TikTok for people selling digital products or kind of fast moving consumer goods, anything that has a slightly lower product value. UGC on that type of platform is massive because it's very short decision window. People will purchase on a whim. Whereas for luxury brands where that's not necessarily the case, and they're maybe a little bit more concerned about brand values and the perception of the brand, UGC seems quite scary. But as I mentioned before, it's a style of creative that you can do in-house and pass off as it being user generated, and that gives you far more control. So yeah, I would say out of the four of these, UGC is probably the most complicated for you to kind of wrap your head around. But we're going to go into a later on in the session. I'm going to walk you through kind of a mock example of how you can plan this type of content, and you'll kind of see how you can tie UGC into your wider campaign. And that then makes it slightly less scary because it's all kind of following one consistent theme. So with that in mind, how to approach behind the scenes content is a conversation that we've had with a couple of our clients who are in the process of shooting big campaigns. And we've said it'd be great to get some behind the scenes content that we can use on social. And normally the question is, well, how much is that going to cost, or how do we do that? If you don't want to pay any extra for behind the scenes content, just stick a phone in someone's hand who's already there. It could be a runner, it could be a PA, it could be somebody in your marketing team. Give them an iPhone or a Google Pixel, something that's got a decent camera on it, and just ask them to film everything and anything. Little clips of people getting their makeup done, little clips of the lights being set up, taking videos of your videographer also filming is really good. Anything like that. Collect as much as you can over the day or the 2 days that you're there. And then, either edit that in-house or, send it. I do a lot of this where I get given a Dropbox of hundreds of clips, and I then take and edit them together, and we make some really nice behind the scenes content. And it's not really costing you that much more than your campaign already. If you're looking at a medium investment, I would also recommend just putting a phone in somebody's hand, but maybe having a look at investing in editing. So the same process while you're on set, in terms of just getting as much as you can, maybe being a bit more creative with some of your camera angles, having somebody that maybe creates content on their own time, if you have somebody in your team that does that, or that's interested in production or filming or whatever. Getting a bit more creative maybe with kind of camera angles or style, and then potentially paying an editor to color grade it properly, edit it together properly, make it look a little bit more flash. Which, if you're going to pay an editor a day rate, £600 maybe, if you're finding like a really good color grader, colorist and editor, and they can, potentially get a suite of clips done in one day. If you're looking to invest more and your C-suite or your creative team or your financial director is really on board with getting this kind of content, I would recommend setting aside a specific budget to get behind the scenes content, and plan it in advance is the one thing that I would recommend and advise. Don't just turn up and think, oh, I'll try and grab somebody for a quick interview. Plan it in advance. Say, I need 20 minutes with our stylist on set to film behind the scenes content. If you're going to be interviewing models about how they feel wearing your designs or wearing your clothes, plan it in advance with the makeup artist or the hairstylist that you have on set and say, while you're doing this model's hair, I need to film this interview. Is that okay? Getting everyone to approve it in advance, because the last thing that you want is to turn up on set and everyone's running around like headless chickens, as they are on these types of shoots, and not getting the content that you want. So plan in advance, have a look at what other brands are doing. I know that, Vogue do a lot of things of like, what's in my bag, and the models will take out all of their stuff GQ do those 10 essential items that are really popular. So think about kind of what's fun but that still relates to your product. So if you were selling, I don't know, luxury perfumes, for instance, have one of your models or somebody that you have on set, I don't know, maybe talk about the memories that scent brings back, because our emotions are tied to smells and scents. And say to them in advance, this is what we kind of want you to talk about. Can you have a think? Get on set and film it. So planning in advance. And that is the luxury that time and money kind of gives you, is that planning and being able to have dedicated time to it. So in terms of approaching behind the scenes content, they would be kind of my recommendations. If you're just starting out with filming it, as I say, start with that small investment option of just gathering footage on the day, see how it performs. We'll come to testing later on in this session, but see how it performs on social, put a little bit of money behind it, set a cap at, I don't know, 4,000 impressions, 5,000 impressions, however you want to do it. See how it performs, have a look at your click-through rates, have a look at, those KPIs that are important to you, whether that's view through, click through, conversion rate, time spent on landing page, all of that kind of stuff, and see how it performs. And then you can decide whether it's worth further investment down the line. Go ahead, Andy.
I was just going to say, I think what the behind the scenes stuff does as well is it introduces an element of personality to the brand as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you get to see the camera people, you get to see the models in between takes where you don't normally get to see. So you see them behaving naturally rather than the sort of sultry poses or, looking to the sky. You get to see them walking around, you get to see, and if it's edited really well, I know you edit our stuff really well, Danielle, you get a real feel for what it was like on set. And actually, when you're trying to engage with new customers, that's really what brings people in, isn't it?
Yeah, so as an example, we work with an accessories brand, and all of their designs are really fun and colourful and quirky. And they sent loads of behind the scenes clips for us to edit from one of their campaign shoots. And in between lighting setups and different kind of, they were filming outside in this kind of like garden situation, and there was some really lovely clips of the model just dancing with the handbags in her hand.
Yeah.
And we used those. They worked so well because the brand is all about kind of self-expression and freedom and being bold and being unapologetically you and kind of all of that kind of thing. So the fact that we had very candid footage of the model just feeling really relaxed, kind of swaying and dancing with the products, with everything going on behind her, worked so well. And none of that was planned. It was just kind of off the cuff, and it was just what we got sent, and we got really lucky. But as Andy said, it brings a level of personality that I think consumers really want to see from brands now. They want to know the people behind the brand, so that's really important.
Yeah.
So if we're looking at UGC content now, which is different from behind the scenes content, my first and probably most important piece of advice would be to research your specific video formats for each platform based on your audience, which sounds like a bit of a mouthful, but the best way to know what works on each platform is to be on the platforms. We hear a lot from some of our clients, oh, but I'm not on TikTok, I don't really know how it works. Which is fine. There should be somebody on your team that is on those platforms that can tell you how it works, tell you what the experience is like, tell you what the type of content looks like. It changes and evolves so quickly that if you don't have a contact, or even if it's a contact at your agency that is on the platforms that can advise you, okay, at the moment, this is what's working. These are the visual hooks that seem to be really popular. These are the audio trends that seem to be, thriving right now. They can give you tips about what works and what doesn't. And if you're making UGC content in-house, you need to be aware of how that works. If you're sending things out to third-party content creators through either kind of natural partnerships that you've found or platforms like Twirl or Billow, those creators will be aware of of the trends that are happening on the platforms at that time. But if you're creating stuff in-house, you definitely need to know what works on each platform and what doesn't. So I'm sorry to say, some of you will have to start downloading TikTok and actually watching it for 15 minutes a day just to see how it's working. I've mentioned before about UGC being made in-house. So, you don't have to be employing content creators to do it. You can do it internally. We do it for some of our clients where, we'll hire a studio for a couple of hours to film UGC style content. It gives you better control over your brand guidelines. If you have to be very specific about the way that things are styled or the color palette, or if you're quite protective over your creative, but you still want to have a look at UGC content, filming it internally is probably your best bet. And that can be things like, just really good close-ups of your product. Daniel Simmons is a good example of that. Does a lot of close-ups of fabrics and zips and how the garments hang on bodies. And it's all filmed in front of like an Infinity Cove white background, just really good UGC style voiceovers and captions, and it ticks all the boxes, and they film that themselves. So if you need to have better control, have a look. There's also loads of YouTube videos about how to make UGC style content. So, watch a couple of them if you don't know, or get in touch with, creative agencies or creative freelancers, people like us that can help maybe just give you some guidelines. If you don't have that and you do actually want to find creators and collaborators, actually spend some time doing some research and having a look at who you like the style of. If they're doing voiceovers, do you like their voice? Do you like how they sound? Do you like their energy? And if you find somebody that you really like, create a really good partnership with them and use them for ongoing content. I think that's really important. If you find a content creator, and this is different from an influencer, these are people that just they can be faceless. You don't even have to see them. Maybe put in a retainer that they're creating, 2-3 pieces of content for you a month, or however you want to do it, and keep that rolling. If you find somebody that it really is the essence of your brand that your audience is going to love, kind of keep hold of them. There's so many creators now that cater for all types of different niches. So find somebody and then kind of hold on to them for dear life. So it doesn't need to be scary, UGC. And I think you can make it premium, you can make it luxury. It doesn't need to be this kind of half-assed, scrappy, jittery phone in my hand, Blair Witch Project style creative. You can make it look really slick. It's just the style that people on these platforms like and they want to see. So bear that in mind. So we're going to take a look at an example. This kind of section is actually going to reference the free resource from the last episode, and also a few of the things that we would have spoken about last month. So I would say if any of this doesn't quite make sense when we finish, go back and watch episode 2, and it'll kind of click into place a little bit more. But we're going to go through the process that I would normally go through when I'm looking at these kind of content and creative strategies for social first assets for a fictional vegan leather jacket brand. And for kind of the nuance of this and for context, let's just say that the leather jackets are being made from old fire hoses, and there is a brand in America that does this, so it can be done.
We're making it difficult for ourselves, but it's going to work. It's
going to work, trust me. I think that's probably the least important thing in this example anyway, but it's there for context so that it's not kind of this, these plastic vegan alternatives to leather. So we've done our audience research, which is something we went into detail with last month. And this is taken directly from our brand story roadmap, this kind of section. So we know from our GA data and from a customer survey that we've done that our audience is unisex, but males tend to have a higher AOV. They're aged between 20 and 35, and they're majority city-based. So for for this purpose, we're thinking London, New York, Paris, kind of our three main drivers. We know that they care about investing in pieces that last. They need pieces that are versatile. They are concerned about ethical practices, but they also want to stand out from the crowd, and they have an interest in popular culture within the creative industry. So think about, cinephiles, film buffs, people that like art, music, books, all of those kinds of things. So they are kind of key demographic. And we know we've asked them some questions about why they buy from us. And we know it's because the particular fabric construction that we've created behaves like real leather, ages like leather, creases like leather. There's a level of quality craftsmanship that comes with each piece. And because of the nature of the fabric, each product is unique, even if the design is the same because of the material choices. So that's kind of our key customer and their wants and needs. We then look at our brand. So what is our brand's history? Well, it was a unique alternative to real leather, retaining the look and feel of that real leather, but it's an alternative to the plastic-based leather alternatives. So you think about that like vinyl kind of fake pleather that we see quite a lot in like fast fashion. We don't want that. The brand's still relatively new, but because of operational improvements, we can now cater to a higher demand. So the focus is acquisition of new customers on a larger scale because there's now the infrastructure to be able to do that. Our brand is described as rebellious, iconic, unique, made to last, innovative, high fashion, versatile. They're kind of the key buzzwords. And then I've also just made up some key flagship products. So these are products that kind of are bestsellers or that are talked about quite a lot or have appeared in kind of press releases or any kind of, styling breakdowns on GQ, Vogue, all of those kinds of places. So that's the context then that we have in terms of finding our brand story for this particular brand. We then look at finding emotion from that. So because we know that our audience likes standing out from the crowd, the emotion is confidence. There needs to be an air of confidence. And if we also think about, it's leather jackets, maybe it's a bit anarchist. We know that kind of maybe punk is a big influence and there's a high level of confidence that's kind of resonates with that demographic of people. So we're going to choose confidence as our emotion. And as it says there, our customer needs is unique style, and they look to movies and music for inspiration. And this is probably the bit that takes the longest and is a little bit more kind of hit and miss, and there's a lot of bouncing ideas around between your team. But the creative theme that we've come up with is finding iconic movie stars or pop culture moments that feature leather jackets, and we're going to kind of recreate them with the brand's products. So, Top Gun. It says Mission Impossible there, but it's not Mission Impossible. Top Gun, Easy Rider, Mad Max, The Matrix, the Sex Pistols, all of these different pop culture icons that are all synonymous with leather jackets. Indiana Jones. Is there red carpet moments that have featured leather jackets? All of these different kind of moments that we can draw on. So that's the creative theme in terms of finding those people and those moments. So if we then take our 4 creative pillars, campaign, behind the scenes, UGC, and kind of our product and bottom of funnel, this is how I would take that brand story and map it across those 4 different formats. So your campaign is kind of your big budget sucking exercise where we're gonna be taking those iconic movie, film, or music moments, and we're gonna recreate them potentially with models wearing those jackets. So, it could be that iconic Sex Pistols concert where they first sang God Save the Queen and everyone lost their minds. But wearing our vegan leather bombers or something like that. It could be a model dressed like Tom Cruise from Top Gun on a motorbike, kind of driving across the desert, be creative with it. But that's kind of where we are. And also being careful with, if we're going to take this particular example seriously, thinking about IP and rights and making sure you're not treading on anyone's toes by recreating those moments. But that's kind of where the campaign is. Behind the scenes is dead easy. You know, we're going to film behind the scenes of that campaign being shot. We're going to have a look at kind of styling videos and how they've been styled, maybe looking at production. So if it's being filmed in a studio, how are the production teams like dressing the set, or taking a look at lighting, anything like that. And then those interviews. So pretty standard in terms of behind the scenes. When we then look at UGC, we can use clipped audio from those same scenes used in the campaign, but using everyday creators. So, there's a big, before TikTok was TikTok, it was Musical.ly, and there was a big amount of creators that were kind of miming along to scripts or TV shows or, music videos and things, and that still happens on TikTok. So taking a look at how we can use clipped audio, trending audio from those specific films or music videos or anything like that, and using those, but with everyday creators, obviously still wearing those jackets. And then obviously your product and your bottom of funnel is your very standard campaign imagery. But you could also include some unboxing and product reviews in that very bottom section of people kind of opening getting a delivery, opening it, styling it and things. That can also form into that bottom of funnel. So in a nutshell, that's kind of how I would split it out. And this kind of forms, I guess, what some marketers would call content strategy, but this is very specific to how it would fall under social. And if we're having a look at what platforms we would use for each of those, there's going to be a massive mix depending on where your audience is spending their time. So I wouldn't say like campaign can only go on Meta and UGC can only go on TikTok, because it depends who your audience is and how they behave on those channels. However, I will say that testing everything on everything is a good place to start, and then finding out what works. In general, we know that campaign works well on Meta and Instagram as a slightly shinier production. Also works really well on YouTube. Again, because it's that more kind of trailer, high production value platform. Behind the scenes will also work on those same platforms, but could also be tested on TikTok. We know that UGC works really well on TikTok, but you might also want to test your campaign on there so that the two make sense together. And then your product, bottom of funnel, think about, your standard Meta ads, your APS-C shopping campaigns, and then also looking at places like Pinterest, where discovery is still really important. So it can overlap massively. So that's probably where you're going to want to map out what content goes where, or just test everything on everything. You should always be testing, having a small budget and monitoring performance. I don't know, Andy, do you have anything? You do a lot more of the practical testing elements than I do. Do you have any advice in terms of testing strategies?
I think go with the mantra fail fast. So try lots of things with 1,000 impressions. Probably the best thing to do, really. We do lots in micro territories as well. So instead of testing US, if you want to break into the US, just test Florida or just test Texas, max it out with, $100 a day. And then after 2 or 3 days, you'll know whether behind the scenes is working, whether your UGC is working, and just keep failing fast. And what you'll find is at the end of the week, end of the month, you'll have a really strong batch of creative, and then don't stop. Keep doing it. Goes into a cycle, goes into a tumble drying, and keep producing the failures, because they'll lead you to the winning pieces.
Yeah, and I think another key takeaway that I would recommend, if you're thinking of, if this is the first time you've gone through this process and you're slightly cautious about investing budget into a campaign based on a story that's not been tested before, UGC is the quickest and most effective way to test new ideas, new messaging, new stories, because it's cheap and it's quick. So if you're thinking, oh God, well, we've never done a brand story that's based on XYZ before, I don't know whether this is going to work, and we don't want to spend £15,000 on a campaign shoot, test it on some kind of UGC first, test the messaging, test the general theme, the emotion, find a creator, explain to them what you want the theme to be, or film something in-house with that specific story. If it resonates with your audience and you're getting high click-through rates, or even high conversions, or your ROAS starts to improve, not just on that platform but everywhere, then we can hazard a guess that it's probably working. So you might want to invest a little bit more money into that specific story. So I would think if you're cautious, or if your team are cautious, that's a good way to start to be able to prove that it will work. And it's a battle that we face all the time with having, to influence and convince and persuade people that this is the right way to go. But if you have solid numbers and solid proof from a smaller test, it can really help in you being able to kind of prove that it's worth its weight. So I would say that would be my quick tip for today.
Love it.
So I feel like that's very kind of surface level in terms of how this would work, following on from last month. And I can appreciate that there might be some questions off the back of it. So if anyone does have any questions, please get in touch with either myself or Andy, and we would be happy to talk to you about how we do this process kind of time and time again for our clients. But it gives you an insight, I think, into how you can map out that brand story in a more visual, kind of tangible way, rather than it just being this kind of idea or this theory that you don't quite know what to do with. So hopefully it's been really insightful. Andy, do you have anything else to add?
No, don't. Just a reminder that this will be able to be downloaded from that resources/webinars section on our website today. Do you think, Danielle?
Yes, it will be today. And anyone that has registered at the time of record, I'll be following up with you with your creative briefing template. But the template will also be available on our website for those of you that are watching this webinar on demand.
Brilliant. Well, thanks everyone for watching. Thanks for taking us through that, Danielle. There's some really useful things in there, and it just gets people, I think, thinking really, even, right from newer brands right the way through to brands that are looking to scale, and even more established brands can take something from that. So hopefully it's been useful for everyone. There's another 3 left in this series in our sort of e-commerce success with storytelling. So please tune in next time. It'll be more likely towards the end of April, this one. Yes. We'll be reaching out to people that are registered with the date. And hopefully we'll see you then.
Thanks, everyone.